Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Torah Talk Weekly Parsha. This week, this coming up Shabbat, is going to be Parshat Naso from Numbers 421 to 789. Welcome back, Rabbi Mollot. How are you today, sir?
Doing great, William. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can hear you loud and clear. I can see you crystal clear. We are in good shape. It's been a great week, very busy week. I'm sure it's been a busy week for you as well with your schooling. You can't even leave your school and you're already having to do a Torah Parsha.
Yeah, it's always super busy over here for
Right
good
on.
things.
Yes, sir. Very good. I'm gonna monitor my volume knobs. They're actually one of them's clipping for some reason. Don't worry, in YouTube land, I'm keeping an eye on that right now, and it should be a lot better. Rabbi, check your mic for me.
Hi, I'm speaking. How am I doing?
That's perfect. I think mine was actually a little too hot. Okay, cool. Looks like we're good to go now. So there we go. So some numbers. There's a lot of a few interesting things happening there. So tell us what you got this week. I know you have a lot of preparation time that it takes for you to get all this stuff done. Last week was amazing. I've heard nothing but great responses for having you on. Your teaching style, So cheers,
I
my
appreciate
friend.
it. I appreciate the positive feedback. Who wouldn't? So thank you so much. It's great to be back. Welcome.
Awesome.
This week we're going to talk about Parshat Naso. I think William put up in the thumbnail the exact chapter and verse where exactly it is. I'm not going to go over that, but Naso is very exciting. It's chock full of very impactful sections. And what's also really exciting about Parshat Naso is that it's the longest Parsha in the Torah. It contains the most verses of any Torah portion, 176 verses.
Wow.
Now, yeah.
Rabbi, let me do something real fast if you don't mind. I'm noticing it's a Skype issue, and I don't know if it's happening in YouTube land, but there's like a half a second delay. I'm gonna disconnect from you on Skype and recall you again and see if it will sync better.
Okie dokie. I won't take it personal.
Just sit right there. Right. 1 second. Okay. We're gonna call him back. I want to make sure that we're doing good, and it could actually be my software that's doing it. I'm not used to seeing that, so therefore I'm not really sure how to fix it. So if this lip sync thing is an issue for you guys, and if it's still doing it, you may have to just, turn your head away and listen. So we'll see.
I am back. Oh, you're saying there's a delay?
That is better, actually. It's the sync is a little bit better, but it is off. But I think it's actually my recording software. It's been asking me to update, and I don't like updating right away because when there's issues with their updates, I don't want to get those issues. I want to update after they've had time to work them all out. I think I might be needing to update for my next show, so we'll see. But go ahead and take this away. And again, viewers out there, if the lip sync is off a little bit, just kind of look away or whatever, so you're not trying to read his lips and hear at the same time. It could be a little distracting. So, Rabbi, it's all yours.
Alrighty. So we were saying that Parshat Naso is the longest Parsha in the Torah, 176 verses. Now, I don't know the significance of the number 176, but what's very interesting is that the longest chapter in the Psalms is also 176 verses long. So there's this interesting parallel between the longest chapter in Torah and the longest chapter in Psalms. Now, what makes that even more interesting is that Psalms is actually comprised of 5 books. At least in a Hebrew edition of the Psalms, I don't know how it is in English. As you read through the Psalms, you're going to see that it's broken up into 5 books. There are 5 books of Psalms, like there are 5 books of Torah, and these are meant to correspond to one another in some spiritual way. That's a little bit beyond me. But you have the 5 books of Psalms corresponding to the 5 books of Torah, and you have the longest Parsha in the Torah is not chapter, it's made up of several chapters, but the longest weekly portion, is 176 verses, and the longest Psalm 119, is also 176 verses. And someone pointed out that in addition to that, the longest Talmudic tractate is 176 folio pages. So there seems to be some kind of a pattern with the number 176 being the biggest one. Why? I don't know, but it's an interesting tidbit about this week's Parsha that makes it more exciting. We're studying the longest Parsha. It should be a song, right? The longest Parsha. Whoa. Anyway, I wanted to point out something that I discovered this week. I've been preparing for this class, so I go to my library of books, and I have books that are written specifically on the Parsha of the week that have interesting insights, and I go through them and I pick out things that speak to me that I'd like to include in the class. And I found this week while I was preparing this book, I'm going to hold up to the camera, okay? The book is called, it's in English, even though the title's in Hebrew. It's called Lilmod Ulelamed. That's also the English title. It's phoneticized in English. You can see, whatever you can see there. Lilmod Ulelamed, which in Hebrew means to learn and to teach. To learn and to teach. This is a book that I got in the 8th grade. My 8th grade Torah teacher, my 8th grade Rebbe, told all of us we have to go and get this book. So we got this book. It's a thin book. You can see it's thin, soft cover. And it has summaries of all the Torah portions in all 5 books of Moses. Summaries of every one in this one little volume. And plus, I'll show you a little bit the layout of the page. On the top, you can see, there's some text. And on the bottom, there's like 2 columns. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
On the bottom, there's 2 columns of text. So the top is the summary of the Parsha, and the bottom are some anthologized insights on some of the concepts in the Parsha.
So it's kind of laid out like a
when I found
chumash.
this book, I said, you know what, this is such a great book for beginners who want to just get a quick handle on what the weekly Parsha is about and some insights like you're doing now coming to this class, but you can have your own book on the shelf that's really short and easy to read. And so it's really old. I don't know if it's still in print, but if you can get your hands on this book called Lilmod Ulelamed, the spelling is, see on the cover it's spelled in Hebrew, but somewhere it's spelled in English on the side. On the side
Oh,
of
there we
binding.
go. That's what I want right there. So,
And it's
Lilmod Ulelamed. Okay.
right.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down. I'm
L-I-L
gonna put that in chat right now.
M-O-D-E. Lilmod is one word.
Lilmod.
And the second word is, how do they spell it here? U-L apostrophe L-A-M-E-D. Lilmod Ulelamed, meaning to learn and to teach. A compendium of insights, homilies, and interpretations of the weekly Sedra. The weekly Sedra is another way of saying the weekly Parsha. And it's written by, the author is Rabbi Mordechai Katz. Rabbi Mordechai Katz. So this is an old book that's a staple of the Jewish library. I had it since the 8th grade, and it came in handy this week. I had to dust it off, but it was helpful for me to do a quick review and a little bit of inspiration before preparing the class.
Very cool.
So I recommend that book to any beginner who would like something along those lines. Fine. The next thing I want to do is just summarize the Parsha. The Parsha covers the following topics. We have the families of the tribe of Levi, and they are assigned their particular tasks in the temple. There are 3 Levitic families, Gershon, Kehas, and Merari, and each one is assigned a different task. One is assigned the task of carrying the individual pieces of the structure of the tabernacle and building it. So they have, like the beams and the sockets and cross beams and that sort of stuff. One of them was assigned to take the curtains and the covers, and it was basically like a tent. And the other group was assigned to carry the vessels that were inside the tabernacle itself, like the menorah, the candelabra, the altar, the ark of the covenant, etc. Those actual pieces of implements, vessels that would be placed inside the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, that would the third family carry that. So we have that delineation of assignment here. There's another counting of the tribe of Levi, that's Levi. In this week's Parsha, we said the book of Numbers last week, we introduced, has a lot of countings. We had a count of the tribe of Levi in last week's Parsha, but they were counting the males from 30 days and up. Now they're counting specifically the males from age 30 to age 50, which will be those who will do the work of the tabernacle. Their time of conscription into that work is between the age of 30 and 50, so they count those men in this week's parsha. Then we have some laws of impurity and how certain categories of impurity must be sent out of the Mishkan. I'm just giving a basic summary. No deep insights right now. So we had the Mishkan, you have to imagine, is like 3 concentric circles, but they're more like concentric rectangles, okay? The central rectangle was the tabernacle itself. This was what I'm really referring to as the encampment. The overall encampment included 3 concentric spaces. The middle space was the tabernacle itself. In the center of the tabernacle was the tent of meeting, this rectangular building. And then around it was a rectangular enclosure that enclosed the courtyard where the large altar was for making the sacrifices. Outside of the tabernacle was the tent of the encampment of the Levites. And I mentioned there were 3 Levitic families. So each one of these 3 families encamped on one of 3 sides. And on the 4th side was Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. And those comprised the four sides of the outer rectangle that enclosed or surrounded the tabernacle space. And then outside of that enclosure, as we mentioned a little bit last week, we have the 12 tribes, 3 on each side. We mentioned last week that there were 4 camps, each camp made up of 3 tribes. So 1 camp on each of 4 sides, 3 tribes on each side, 12 tribes altogether. So the center was the tabernacle, then the Levitic camp, and then the Israelite camp. Got the picture? William, did you get the picture? More or less? I'll take your word for it that you did. And so now we're told that there are 3 types of impurity that have to exit from one of each of these camps based on their level or category of impurity. There was someone who was impure because of contact with a dead body. Someone who was impure because of contact with a dead body could not enter the tabernacle. They had to remain either in the Levitic camp or in the Israelite camp. A person who was impure because of a malady that was called for a male zav and for a woman zava, which was a type of, let's call it a unusual emission, an unusual emission from the reproductive organ. The male would have an unusual emission, or the woman would have a certain type of unusual emission, and for each one it was something different. I'm not going to go into the details of what these are, but this type of unusual emission would render the person impure. And so if they had this type of impurity, for a male, again, called zav, and for a woman called zava, they would have to exit the Levite camp. They couldn't enter the tabernacle, and they couldn't enter the Levite camp. They would have to remain in the Israelite camp. And the final level of impurity that's talked about here is that of the mitzorah. Mitzorah means a person with a malady on the skin known as tzara'as. This is sometimes translated as leprosy. In Jewish tradition, we understand this is not medical leprosy. This was something that appeared as leprosy, but was actually a spiritual ailment. It was brought on by spiritual causes, and it could only be cured through spiritual processes. So what you might think of as leprosy, we Jews do not call it leprosy. It's called tzara'as, and someone with tzara'as or tzara'at was called a mitzorah. A mitzorah, a person with tzara'as, could not enter the tabernacle, could not enter the Levite camp, and could not even enter the Israelite camp. So someone in any part of the encampment which would become infected with tzara'as had to completely leave the encampment and dwell basically in the wilderness until they were healed and allowed to come back in. And there's lots of details to talk about with that, but I'm going to leave that for now. The next section of this exciting parsha is we have some additional laws for theft. In particular, very interesting. What happens if someone steals from a convert? Now, I'll just back up a little bit. If someone steals and the person they stole from dies, now the Torah requires that the stolen item or amount be returned to the victim of the theft. Now, what happens if the victim of the theft has died in the interim before the thief is able to return it? Now, most thieves are not interested in returning. So obviously, we're talking about someone who was caught or confessed, and therefore we require of them that they return the theft, and there's other penalties added on. We won't go into those details. But what happens if the person dies? The person who was the victim dies. Who do they return it to? Do you know, William, who they return it to? They return it to the heirs. The heirs, whoever is the heir, the next of kin who would inherit that person, the inheritors get the stolen object returned to them with the additional penalties, whatever. So now the question becomes, the Torah deals with what happens if a convert is stolen from. The convert has no heirs because let's say they don't have children. They've converted with no children. Their family that's not part of the Jewish nation is not eligible to inherit. So who gets it then? It goes to the priest. It's given to one of the Kohanim, one of the priests. And we're going to talk about soon why that is. It's given to a priest, to a Kohen. Fine. That's the next bit. Moving on, we have the exciting issue of the Sota. The Sota is I don't want to call her the adulterous woman. I want to call her maybe I don't even want to say necessarily promiscuous woman. Sota literally means the woman who has gone astray. The woman who has gone astray. And the idea is that the husband suspects that the woman has committed an adulterous act with someone. And so he forbids her. He doesn't have any evidence. He just has a suspicion. So he forbids her from being alone with a certain person. Now, it's never permitted in Jewish law for a man and woman who are not married to be secluded together. They can never be in seclusion. Now, the laws of that are complicated, even for a minute, for a second. There's details that I won't go into. But let's say for a meaningful amount of time, a man and a woman who are not married with another cannot be alone together. It has to be accompanied by someone else. So that's never allowed. But as an extra precaution, he tells her, you better not get caught alone with that guy or else. Okay. Now, if she goes ahead and secludes herself with the man that he's suspicious of and that he warned her about, again, and witnesses see that they've been secluded together, he can then bring her to the priest, to the Kohen in the Tabernacle. This is, of course, in the times of the Tabernacle. And there was a ceremony that they went through, basically where this section of the Torah would be written on a scroll with all its details. The scroll would be placed into water from the laver, the water basin in the Tabernacle, and the words of the words would be dissolved into it. Some dirt from the earth of the Tabernacle would be put in, and they would give the woman a warning. They said, you can confess, or you can drink this mixture. It's water from the laver with the words that have dissolved into it of the Torah dealing with this incident, with dirt from the earth of the Tabernacle in it. You can drink this mixture. If you are guilty, then you will suffer internal injuries and die. If you are not guilty, then you will have an internal blessing and you'll merit to have children, or if you're childless, you'll merit to have a child, to become fertile. And if you would have a child, then you would merit that your child would be in kind of an excellent health, right? A blessing to the child. And then, so if she insists that she's innocent, she drinks the mixture, and then one of two things happens. She either dies, or she doesn't die, in which case he knows that she wasn't guilty, that he thought she was, and she receives this blessing in her children. Okay, I'm just giving you the plain bare bones details. Summary. The next section of the Parsha is about the Nazir. The Nazir is the Nazirite. The Nazirite is a person who takes upon himself a vow not to do three things. Number one, not to drink wine or eat any grape or grape product. Number two, not to cut his hair. And number three, not to become contaminated, as we spoke about before, through contact with a dead body. These three things he vows not to do. If he breaks his vow, he's violated a Torah prohibition, and there's a penalty for that. So we have the Nazirite section, which comes next. And following that, we have what's called the priestly blessing, Birkas Kohanim, where the family of Aaron, the Kohanic priests, are commanded a particular formula of a blessing with which they should bless the Jewish people upon certain occasions. In Ashkenazi communities, this still takes place on the festival days. The Kohanim will go up on a platform in the synagogue and they will bless the people using this formula. In the land of Israel, I should point out, the Ashkenazic communities, or really all communities in the land of Israel, pronounce the priestly blessing every single day. Outside of the land of Israel, as I said, Ashkenazic Jews, that's Jews of essentially Eastern European origin, will only do, their communities will only do it on festivals. Sephardic Jews, Jews of Spanish and North African, Middle Eastern descent, will do this every day, right? So this is a ritual that's still performed today among the Jewish people. But in the times of the temple, it was performed in the temple. Now, the final section that we're going to talk about is the section of the inauguration of the tabernacle and the gifts of the Nisim, the princes of the tribes. We have a description of an elaborate ceremony where for 12 days straight, one of each of the princes of the tribes that were appointed in last week's Parsha come with all kinds of elaborate gifts, animals and spices and oil and gold and silver, many different types of gifts. They come each one bearing to the temple, to the tabernacle, as a donation. And very interestingly, each one of the 12 princes brings the exact same offering. They bring the exact same offering, and it's repeated 12 times, which forms a puzzle. And that's one of the reasons that this section is so long, the Parsha is so long, because it repeats this procession 12 different times. And every one is identical. And we're all scratching our heads and saying, why couldn't the Torah say, this is the gift that each one of them brought, each one on his day, and list it one time, instead of on the first day, this one came and this is what he brought. He brought this, and he brought this, and he brought this, and he brought this, and he brought this. And the second day, the prince of this tribe came, and he brought the same thing, and the same thing, and the same thing. And it just repeats and repeats. Why? So that's a question. We'll get to answer questions later. But that takes us to the end of a summary of the topics in this week's Parsha. And now I'd like to jump into some insights. Are we ready, William?
We are ready. Sorry, I had my mic muted.
It's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot, but sometimes I like to feel like I'm talking to somebody.
No, you're good. You're
good.
So
now, we'll go into some insights. So one very interesting thing, I think the first topic that I'll pick on, if we don't have time for questions, otherwise maybe someone could ask, what about this that you didn't talk about? But the first thing I want to pick on is I want to pick on that section we talked about stealing from the convert, and that a Kohen gets the item returned to him because the convert, if in the case the convert has no heirs, which is kind of was rather common because the convert came in without family. So why do you suppose that the money or whatever was stolen was returned to a Kohen, someone from the priestly tribe, rather than, I don't know, some alternative if you have one? But why should the Kohen get it? What do you think? Anyone have any ideas? Well, I can't see the chat, so I don't know.
No, that's okay. In fact, I don't have it up. I'll pull it up. I need to pull it up on the screen. So, I mean, if a convert doesn't have any heirs, no wife, no kids, no nephews or whatever, or proper, I mean, if it doesn't go somewhere good, then the money, nobody gets it, right? It just sort of like
right. In other words, you're gonna say, he's gonna keep it. The guy's still, there's no heirs. All right.
So it seemed like it would be logical, being that they're the convert, and to even become a convert, I mean, you've got to put your trust in the Kohanim and to the whole Jewish faith idea together. It would make sense to go there. Now, it wouldn't make sense if they had an heir and still had to give it to the priest. That would be kind of weird.
Right. So we're not. That's not the case. But when there's no inheritor, which the Torah sort of picks as typical of that, the case of the convert. In fact, I don't think the Torah actually specifies that it's a convert, but it's understood. The commentators understand it based on certain textual clues that is the case that's being specified in the Torah. Otherwise, it would be problematic for other reasons. So that's what I'm going with. But so the Torah more or less spells it out, but it's so beautiful it deserves to be highlighted, and that is because the Kohanim are the Kohanim are called by God God's portion. They are God's portion. They don't receive an inheritance in the land. Rather, the Kohanim, how do they sustain themselves? The rest of the Jews, they receive a portion in the land. They work the land and they make their livelihood based on, their individual portion.
See, I thought it was all the Levites that was.
It is true. Yes, that's true. All the Levites don't, but in particular, while the Levites do get a tithe, they do get a tithe. The Kohanim, to a greater extent, get many different gifts. There's 24 different gifts that are given to a Kohen, which we won't go through right now, aside from what's called Teruma. It's sort of like the first tithe, and then they get a portion from the sacrifices, and they get a portion from the dough, and first fruits, and the firstborn animal. And there's just a whole bunch of things that they get over the Levites, and it makes sense because while the Levites have a certain attachment to the work in the tabernacle, the priests have the central work in the tabernacle, which is the more holy tasks. So they're more so on an elevated level of closeness with Hashem and considered more so if you would say so, the direct portion of Hashem. They're like Hashem's closest kin, as it were.
Nice, right.
So the reason that the Kohanim inherit the convert is because the convert is also God's closest kin. Why is the convert God's closest kin? Because they don't have any other kin. They don't have ancestral roots in any other tribe. When they come into the Jewish nation, they come directly under what's called the Kanfei HaShechina, the wings of the divine presence. God sort of scoops them up and says, "You're my children now. You're my children."
And
so if they're God's children, so the inheritor is really God. The inheritor is the next of kin for the convert is God himself. So God's proxies on earth are those who serve him in the temple. So he says, you're my family, give to the next of kin, give to the Kohen who's my portion because you're my portion. So I want to share a beautiful story. Now what I'm telling you is something of a legend. Okay. Some of the details that I'm telling you are very well corroborated. It's based on factual events. Some of the details of the story are only known by oral tradition and are somewhat, subject to question. But it's such a beautiful story with such a beautiful message, I feel, that I want to share it with you. And that is the story of someone whose name is, I wrote it down, Count Valentin Potocki. Count Valentin Potocki was a Polish. He was a Polish noble. He was a Polish nobleman. To make a long story short, who in the 18th century or the 19th century chose to convert to Judaism from Catholicism, which was totally unheard of and it was totally illegal. Jews were not allowed to make converts under penalty of harsh punishment, and the Catholics were not allowed to convert out of the religion under penalty of harsh punishment. But this fellow, Count Valentin Potocki, was so moved by his interactions with the Jews and what he learned from them about the Torah that despite all penalties to the contrary, he went and he converted to Judaism in, I believe it was Amsterdam, where it was legal to convert, not in Eastern Europe. But he went to Amsterdam and he converted, but he had to hide among the Jews because if his identity would be known, he could be punished. And he was known as Avraham ben Avraham Hager. Avraham, the son of Avraham the convert. Now, all converts are called Ben Avraham, son of Avraham, because they are considered the spiritual descendants of Avraham, the patriarch of the Jewish people. So all converts get the name Ben Avraham or Ben Sarah. son of Abraham, son of Sarah, or for a woman, Bas Avraham, Bas Sarah, daughter of Abraham, daughter of Sarah. And he took upon himself as his first name also Avraham. So he was known as Avraham ben Avraham Ager. Now the sad, tragic ending of the story is that he was eventually discovered and arrested, abducted, and put to trial and punished by a court, and he was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. Now, during his imprisonment before his death, he had a opportunity for a visitation with the Vilna Gaon, the famous Gaon of Vilna, Vilna being a city in Lithuania, Vilnius, Gaon being a Hebrew word for a genius. He was known as the genius of Vilna. He was the greatest Torah luminary of that generation, as well as many generations before him and after him. We've never seen anyone like the Vilna Gaon. Now, the real Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, Eliyahu of Vilna, met with him, and they had a very emotional interaction where Valentin, Avraham ben Avraham, was extremely sad, and the Vilna Gaon said, "Why are you sad? Are you sad that you're going to die?" And he said, "No, I'm ready and willing to die for what I believe. For me, the truth is more important than life itself." He says, "But what I'm sad about is when you Jews die and you go to the next world, you're reunited with the souls of your ancestors that came before you, with your immediate relatives, your parents, your grandparents." He says, "I have no one. When I come to the next world, I'm going to be totally alone. I'm going to be totally alone." And that's what makes me sad. And the Vilna Gaon told him an incredible thing. He said, there is a verse in Isaiah, and I'm sorry that I don't have the citation here. I thought I wrote it down, but apparently I forgot to. There's a verse in Isaiah that says, "Ani Rishon va'ani Acharon." I am the first, famous verse. I am the first and I am the last. And I think the rest of the verse goes, "Umibaladai ein Moshiach," or Einon Moshiach, and there is no savior other than me. Very famous verse. I am the first and I am the last.
Be 44:6, I think.
I think you're right.
Okay.
Sounds right. So I told you I'm not Tovia singer. So,
okay.
So I'm the first and I am the last. So the Medrash, so to speak, the rabbinic commentary, if you will, says as follows: I am the first, ani rishon ein li av, I have no father. V'ani acharon, and I am the last, ein li ben, I have no son. The rabbis elaborated on this verse. What does it mean I'm the first, I'm the last? I have no father and I have no son. But the Vilna Gaon was famous for something in particular. Among the many things he was famous for, he was famous for his textual scholarship of having scoured hundreds of manuscripts in order to determine that some of our literature has been altered over time, and he restored many of the original authentic texts that had been corrupted. And he said, based on my scholarship, this midrash that I've quoted you actually should say something else. And here's what it authentically says. It says, Ani Rishon, I am the first. Ani of, Lemi she'ein lo of. I am the father for those who have no father. Ani acharon, I am the last. Ani ben, Lemi she'ein lo ben. I am the son for those who have no son. And, the Vilna Gaon comforted Avraham ben Avraham Hager. He said, when you go to the next world, he says, of course you're going to have family. Of course you're going to have a father and you're going to have a son. He says, because God himself is your immediate family. And he's going to be there waiting for you and greeting you. And he's going to scoop you up into his arms. And there is no greater afterlife to look forward to. And with that, he was able to comfort Avraham ben Avraham Hager in those moments before he met his unfortunate, tragic end. So I wanted to share that because that's what comes out of this Parsha, that the Kohanim, the priests, inherit the property of the convert because the Kohanim are the portion of God, and God says, I am his heir, I am his inheritor. He is my direct next of kin. The convert is my direct next of kin. Okay, let's continue. We get to the portion of the Sota, what I call the woman gone astray. She's gone astray. Now, why is she gone astray? What if it turns out she's innocent? She's not all that innocent, you have to understand. Because if she was secluded with this other guy with witnesses, she already did two things wrong. Because number one, she's not allowed to be secluded with a man she's not married to. And number two, her husband warned her not to do that. She disobeyed him, and she did it again in front of witnesses. So we're not talking about the most righteous woman to begin with. The question is, how guilty is she? How much has she done wrong? What was behind closed doors, we don't know until we come and do the test. So that's why she's gone astray either way. The question is, how far astray? So what's incredible here, what someone pointed out that I listened in a class this week about this topic, is when matters of law need to be decided. How does the Torah instruct us to decide matters of law? Does anybody know? Well, the Torah says explicitly, when you have a doubt in the matter of law, what should you do? And I'm sorry that I don't have a citation where it says it. It says you go to the court in Jerusalem, and you go before the priests, the Torah teachers, the judges, the deciders of the law. You bring your case, and they will clarify the law before you, and whatever they rule, you must follow. Right? We are told by the Torah, in matters of doubt in Jewish law, we defer to the legal experts, the judges, the courts, and what the courts rule in a matter of doubt, in a matter of law, we follow. And these are very naturalistic procedures. They look in the books, they study, they meditate, they think, they judge, they weigh, and they say, comes out in our judgment, and there's maybe several judges on the court, and they go by the majority. This is going to be the law to follow. Very naturalistic. What's very peculiar about the Sota is it's the only time we find that God says we're going to decide a matter of law based on hocus pocus, based on magic, right? Magic. You're going to take this scroll, you're going to write these magic words, you're going to put it in the water and dissolve it in there. You're going to take some dirt from the floor and sprinkle it in, right? You're going to shake it up in there in the little container, right? And this magic potion is going to reveal the truth. Drink. If you're guilty, this shall happen. If not, why don't the judges just sort of like look at the evidence, hear the witnesses, measure it out? Why you're like, okay, it looks like she did it. Okay, I'm sorry, husband and wife, you're going to have to split up. Your marriage is over. Or no, it looks like she didn't do it. You can go home and live together again and live happily ever after. But somehow God says, stop, judges, stand aside. I'm handling this in a miraculous way. I'm going to make a miracle happen. Right? Why particularly in this case? Now, as I'm asking the question, your wheels may be turning. But I'm going to add one more. Well, maybe I'll leave the one more till after. But the answer that I heard that was so beautiful, and no one disagrees with this, as I will elaborate, is that when it comes to harmony between a husband and wife, God doesn't leave anything for the imagination. Because imagine if we would allow the judges to decide. And they say, based on our best analysis of the evidence, we've determined that we believe she's innocent or she's guilty or whatever. Let's say they say she's innocent and they go home. Is he ever going to look at his wife the same way? He's going to forever be suspicious of her. He's going to say, listen, I know the judges let you off easy. We didn't have enough evidence, but I just can never forgive you for what I think you did. And they'll never have harmony and they'll never have peace. That relationship will never be the same. But if a miracle occurs, that it's God himself who comes out of the woodwork, so to say, and says, she's innocent. It's me, God. Right? So he's like, okay, I was wrong. He'll have no choice but to accept it. And he'll be sort of on the apologetic end of it. He'll be like, oh, honey, I'm sorry for, and it'll bring back the balance of harmony into the home. So God says, when it comes to peace between a husband and wife, I'm getting involved because this is so important to me. And why is it so important? Why is harmony between a husband and wife so important? It's extremely important because the the relationship between a husband and wife is a microcosm for the relationship between us and God ourselves. We are meant to be in a loving relationship with God, in an intimate relationship with God on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. And the way we learn how to manage such a close, intimate relationship is God gave us a model on earth. It's a husband and wife who are truly one. Really, man and woman were originally one person, as we know. They were originally one soul. They were originally one body. They were split in two, and when they joined together, it's a rejoining of the soul, of the spark of the divine that's been given to them. So when a husband and wife come together, it's in a certain way, it's a restoration of wholeness of God. It's not only a representation of God on earth, but it's a restoration of the wholeness of this fragment of God that's been fractured. God wants wholeness. He wants unity. God is one, and he wants for there to be one. Our rabbis tell us God's name is peace. Shalom is one of the names of God. God wants for there to be peace. It's a revelation of his name in the world. A man is called Ish in Hebrew, and a woman is called Isha. The word Ish is spelled Aleph Yud Shin. The middle letter of Ish is a Yud. The word Isha is spelled Aleph Shin Hey. The last letter of Isha is a Hey. The letters Yud and Hey combine together to form the name of God. When man and woman come together in holiness, they're unifying an aspect of God himself. So God says, this is personal. This is personal. I want to ensure the harmony between husband and wife. So much so that, listen carefully, those verses that it says that these words will be written on a scroll and placed in the water, and the ink is dissolved in the water, those verses contain God's name. It's forbidden to erase God's name. The Torah forbids us to erase God's name. We have to be so careful with God's name. We can't pronounce God's name in vain. And here we're writing out his full name, Yud, and then Hey, and Vav, and Hey, the four-letter name, and erasing it. God says, erase my name. If it will bring harmony between a husband and wife, I'm willing to have my name erased. I'm willing to go so far. There's nothing that should stand between a husband and wife's harmony. Erase my name. Harmony between husband and wife is one of the most important principles in the Torah. And we have a word for it. It's called shalom bayis. Shalom bayis. Shalom in the home, right? Peace in the home. We find another amazing example of this where Abraham and Sarah are in the tent. This is in Genesis 18. There's a story there, several verses. They're in the tent. They're visited by these three angels. They don't know they're angels. They think they're men. And one of the angels, he says, where is Sarah, your wife? And Abraham says, oh, she's in the tent. And he says, in a year from now, Sarah is going to have a child. Right? And he's announcing this message from God. Your wife Sarah, who's 90 years old, or she will be 90, she'll be 89. In a year when she's 90 years old, she's going to have a child. Now Sarah said she was standing behind the doorway, and she hears this, and she laughs. She laughs, and she says, really? After, she says, it's interesting what she says, what she says, after my becoming old, I'm going to become young, and my husband is also old. My husband is also old. So then God comes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, what's going on with your wife? Do you know she said that she doesn't believe she's going to have a child because you're too old? No, sorry, he says it because she's too old. Because she's too old. That's what he says. She said because she's too old. Now, she said because he's too old. Now, she might have also said that she's too old, but God leaves out the part that says that she's too old. That he's too old. God doesn't tell Abraham, she said you're old, because it would hurt him to hear that his wife is looking at him that way, in a pejorative way, in a negative way. So in order to preserve the harmony between Abraham and Sarah, so God conceals from Abraham her full statement that she said that he's old, and he just tells her that she said that she's old. So then our rabbis learn from here that for the sake of peace, even God will tell a lie. Now you're going to say he didn't tell a lie. He just left information out. But I'll make it better for you. The truth is that I led you on a little bit. The verse that's often translated is, after I become old, shall I become young? Shall I become young is really not translated correctly. And if you look at Rashi's commentary, you'll find that not only did Sarah have her period that day for the first time in many, many years, how many years postmenopausal, I don't know what she was, but she, because Abraham tells her to prepare bread, and then he doesn't end up serving the bread. So why doesn't he end up serving the bread if he told her to prepare it? So rabbis tell us that because while she was preparing the bread, she had her period, and it rendered her impure, and it rendered the bread impure. Now, nobody here should worry about this. These laws are not applicable today, but they practiced the laws of purity as though in the time of the temple. So because the dough had become impure, that food that she prepared, she didn't serve. So Rashi tells us she already began to get her youth back that day. And if you read the verse carefully, she says, after I've become old, I have become young. There's no punctuation in the Torah. There's no question mark written in there. It's sort of an interpretation to imagine that she's asking it as a question. Shall I become young? But she's actually saying in the past tense, I have become young. In other words, what she really is saying, according to Rashi, is, after I become old, I've become young, but my husband's still too old to have a child. So she was saying specifically on him, and God completely reverses it. He says, your wife said that you're too old? I messed it up again. Your wife said that she's too old? He concealed from Avraham the fact that she called him old and herself young. He flips it around, which is really not a truthful representation of what she said. But our rabbis derive from here, you see, for the peace between a husband and wife, even God will be dishonest, so to speak. What limits God will go for peace? There's no limit. Now, there are many stories that demonstrate this, but I'm coming to the end of my time, and I want to add a few more insights. So I think you get the idea, without any extra stories, the importance of number one, marital harmony. But even more than marital harmony between different people, even people who are not married to one another. So, for example, I had a story where I was dealing with a realtor, and the realtor was helping us to find an apartment, and there was a certain apartment we were interested in, and we signed the paper with the realtor that we would pay them. If we ended up renting the apartment, we would pay them a fee. So then we started entering into negotiation with the landlord, and the landlord said, "No, I don't want it. I don't want to do it. I'm not interested in." And we lost that apartment, and the realtor said, "Okay, I'll show you a different apartment." Right? Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that this landlord was reasonable. The landlord was reasonable. So I said, you know what? I did not speak to the landlord. Everything was done through the realtor, and the landlord said no to the realtor and said, I don't want to rent out my apartment through you. So I said, you know what? Let me see if I could get in touch with this landlord myself and see if I can negotiate something, because going through the realtor fell through. So that's what happened. I managed to get the person's number. I called the landlord. I found from the previous tenant, whatever. I called the landlord. I said, listen, I'm interested in renting your apartment. And it worked out. I ended up renting the apartment. So the realtor comes to me and says, pay. I said, pay? What are you talking about? You failed. You were supposed to negotiate this apartment. You failed. I did it without you. You want me to pay you for what? So they said, you signed a paper. It said, if you rent the apartment, you're going to pay us. I was like, yeah, but I did it without you. You said deals off. You said moving on. You were done. It became a fight. I said, let's go to a mutual third party, a Torah scholar. We'll have him decide the case. We were ready, going guns blaring. Anyway, before I went to go ask a person who was himself a Torah scholar. This was not the mutual party we agreed on, but I wanted to get his opinion. I said, this is what's happening with me. Who's right? Who's wrong? What should I do? And I told him the whole thing. And he said, pay them the money. And I said, what? But how am I wrong? I shouldn't have to pay them the money. It's a lot of money. I shouldn't have to pay them. He says, pay them the money. I said, why? He said, it's worth it for shalom. I'm not saying you're in the wrong. I'm not saying they're in the right. But you want to know whether or not it's worth it to have a battle with this person and be at odds with them? It's not worth it. It's more worthwhile to pay the money out of your pocket and have a good relationship with those other people than to be right, to be in a fight, and to win and have it your way. It's not worth it. And from that point on, my wife always set aside money in what we call the Shalom Bias Fund. This is the Harmony in the Home Fund, that we don't apply it just in the home. We have money set aside that when things come up, that it's a matter of not right or wrong, but it's a matter of peace or disharmony, but it's going to cost, right? Not just necessarily between ourselves. I don't think, thank God that doesn't necessarily become relevant, but it's true. Sometimes your wife says, I want to buy this unreasonably priced purchase. And, for the sake of peace, just say yes. Just say yes. Have money set aside for the sake of peace. But I'm not even talking about that. Just when it comes to things with our neighbors, with people we deal with, sometimes it might incur money and we know we're in the right and we shouldn't have to pay. But you know what? For the sake of peace, it's worth it. For the sake of peace, it's worth it. If God says, erase my name, for the sake of peace, it's worth it. There's a lot of great stories on this topic, but we're running out of time. I just wanted to add, it's not necessarily only marital harmony, peace between you and your fellow human being. It's very difficult to put a price on that.
Right.
It's very difficult to put a price on that. If God's willing to erase his name, be willing to make a compromise that's comparable. Anyway, let's go on. Nazir, the Nazirite. The Nazirite, I have two things to say about the Nazirite. I'll probably only have time to say one. The Nazirite swears off. He swears off. I'll say one thing and then I want to get to the princes at the end because I already mentioned the question in the beginning. The Nazirite makes a vow, no wine, no, no cutting hair, no impurity from the dead. Why? So what's interesting is that the section of the Nazirite follows immediately after the section of the woman who has gone astray. And our rabbis teach us the reason why is to teach you that a man who sees the episode of the woman who has gone astray should take upon himself a Nazirite vow. Why? Because he sees if this could happen to this nice Jewish family, these good upstanding people, if such a terrible thing could happen that there's adultery or there's suspicion of adultery or whatever it might be, if such a thing could happen to these normal people, why should I think I'm immune? If I go about my life the way I went before without taking on some extra restriction, I'm liable to fall into the same pitfall. So I need to swear off wine, this liquid that loosens inhibitions and causes a person to do things he would never do. The growing of the hair is to sort of make a person lose his sense of interest in maintaining his physical demeanor. I'm not so concerned with the physical. I'm more concerned with the spiritual and the refrainment from coming to the defilement of the impure. Again, to raise ourselves up to a higher spiritual level. We're going to emphasize spirituality, and we're going to try to move away from the physicality of what wine brings us to, of what being too overly concerned with having a trendy haircut, etc., brings us to, and the like. We create fences around ourselves to move ourselves away from an interest in physicality and towards a higher spirituality, and that prevents us from falling into the type of depravity that we saw in the episode of the Sota. But what's interesting is that it says at the end of his Nazirite period, he says for 30 days, for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long he says that he's going to take this vow, he keeps for a period of time, and that's supposed to elevate him for that period. It's not meant to be permanent. And then when it's done, he's strengthened from that. But when you see something that shows you a weakness, you strengthen yourself. So what's interesting is he brings a number of offerings, and among the offerings that he brings, the sacrifices, if you will, he brings a sin offering. He brings a sin offering. Why does he bring a sin offering after becoming a Nazirite? If anything, he moved himself away from sin more. Why would he be required to bring a sin offering after the end of his Nazirite period? So one of the incredible answers that we find from our sages is that there's something sinful. Listen to this. You're not going to hear this in church or in a mosque. There is something sinful about depriving yourself of pleasures of the physical world. Because God created a world full of pleasure, not for you not to enjoy it. He created a world full of pleasure that you should see that he's a benevolent God. And when you experience the pleasures of this world, whether it's beautiful sights, beautiful sounds, delicious smells, delicious tastes, pleasurable touch, you say, what a wonderful God that created a world so full of pleasure, and a being like me who's able to enjoy millions of colors and smells and sounds and sensations and emotions. This is a God who truly has my best interest in mind. This is a God who truly has my benefit and ultimate pleasure in mind. And if therefore I would follow his directives, it could only lead me to the ultimate pleasure. And it must be that after this short life in this world, the eternity that we come into is one of absolute unimaginable bliss. Because if this is the deliciousness of the physical world, so then just imagine the deliciousness of the spiritual world, which is so much higher and closer to God. So by depriving ourselves, we're actually moving away from the goal. The goal is that we should have a balance, being able to harness the joys and pleasures of this world, but direct them spiritually into a relationship with God. We eat in a relationship with God, whether it's through keeping the kosher laws or pronouncing blessings over our food before or after, or feeling some type of gratitude and connection to God when we do it. Again, we talked about the intimacy between husband and wife, which is considered Kodesh Kodashim. The bedroom is the Holy of Holies. This is the place of the ultimate pleasure, and this is a place which in Judaism has a very high place, because it's meant to, again, develop our sensitivity for the idea that we're in a relationship with God that's meant to be blissful and pleasureful. So yes, there are restrictions, but the restrictions are there for us to be able to focus the pleasures of the world into a spiritual way that connects us and binds us to God. We have to control ourselves, but really there's almost nothing that's forbidden in this world, because whatever we could taste that's forbidden, you could taste something that's delicious, that's equivalent. And so too with all the different forms of pleasure. Hashem says, I want you to enjoy my world. Don't overindulge to the point of forgetting about me, that you're obsessed with physicality and not spirituality. But don't refrain either to the point that you don't get it. You're not getting the benefit that I want to give you. You're not seeing how much love I'm trying to give you. The intervention of the Nazirite is one that is meant in particular circumstances in order to correct an imbalance. We have to bring it back into balance by moving for temporary time to the other extreme. But the ideal in Judaism is we embrace the pleasures of the physical world and we channel them and focus them into a relationship with Hashem, who we learn to know as our benevolent creator, that he loves us and we want to love him, and we want to have a blissful eternal relationship with him. So therefore the Nazirite, you didn't take full advantage of my world? Say no offering. You have to know that's not the ideal. Okay, final thought in the last minute is, because I brought it up, why does the Torah repeat over and over the donation of the princes? When it's the same thing over and over, just say, every single one brought this. Say it once. Is because it wasn't the same in the eyes of God. How so? They brought exactly the same items, the same animals, the same gold, the same silver, the same spices, the same everything. Because everyone has a different thought. Everyone has a different emotion. Everyone has a different intention. Your relationship with God is private and personal and within you. And even though externally we may all keep the same laws, what's going on inside is completely personal and different. And God's looking more at what's inside than what's on outside. So as each prince comes and we're watching going, he's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing. God says, no. The intent and motivations and thoughts and emotions of this one who's bringing the offering, I see him individually, and I have an individual, unique relationship with him, and so to the next one, and so to the next one, and so too with each and every one of us. Hashem wants to have an intimate, emotional connection that's unique with each and every one of us. And with that, we'll close out this week's Parsha. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great week.
And that was most excellent as always. Really appreciate your insight, and you really packed it all in. Like, try to get everything in at this time. That was awesome too. Sometimes there's not time, which makes sense why they would read this every single year over, because it takes a lifetime to really get everything out of it. You know what I mean? So looking forward to next week for sure, Hashem willing. Thank you for your time, Rabbi. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to click that like button if you like what's going on. Subscribe. When you click the subscribe button, you'll have an option to turn on some notifications or all notifications. You want to turn on all notifications if you're missing things. And that's kind of how that works. Anyway, so you guys have a great week. Shalom, shalom, everybody. And shalom, Rabbi. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much. Shabbat tov.
תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב